just because it's God's will doesn't mean it's easy. There are several personalities in the Bible whose stories meet this criteria. Joseph is one. He was in prison for several years before he saved the world from famine in Egypt. The story of Jesus certainly qualifies here. He had to argue with the Pharisees all the time during the course of his ministry, and then he, of course, was killed to save the world. Today we're going to take a look at the story of David. The Lord had turned his back on Saul, had rejected him as king because Saul couldn't obey the things he was told to do. And so he told Samuel to go and anoint the king. And we see this story in 1 Samuel 16, verses 1 through 13. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? Saul will hear about it and will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, 'I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.' Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, "The Lord has not chosen this one either." Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, "Nor has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, "The Lord has not chosen these." So he asked Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" "There is still the youngest," Jesse answered, "but he is tending the sheep." Samuel said, "Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives." So he sent and had him brought in. He was ruddy, with a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. He is the one." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David in power. Samuel then went back to Ramah. So here we have the sign that David's in God's will, and it's going to be king. He's going to be king. The will of God is for him to be king. And further positive signs occur in 1 Samuel 16, 14 through 23. Now the Spirit of the Lord had departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. Saul's attendants said to him, "See, an evil spirit from God is tormenting you. Let our Lord command his servants here to search for someone who can play the harp. He will play when the evil spirit from God comes upon you, and you will feel better." So Saul said to his attendants, "Find someone who plays well and bring him to me." One of the servants answered, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the harp. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is fine looking, and the Lord is with him." Then Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, "Send me your son David, who is with the sheep." So Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sent them with his son David to Saul. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor bearers. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, "Allow David to remain in my service, for I am pleased with him." Whenever the Spirit from God came upon Saul, David would take his harp and play, then relief would come to Saul. He would feel better, and the evil spirit would leave him. So not only do we see that David has been anointed, but David also has been placed in the king's palace. So we got 2 positives here. This is a good sign for David. David continued to enjoy success against Goliath in 1 Samuel 17:20 through 24. And then we'll go to 32 and 45 through 51 in the same chapter. Early in the morning, David left the flock with a shepherd loaded up and set out as Jesse had directed. He reached the camp as the army was going out to its battle position, shouting the war cry. Israel and the Philistines were drawing up their lines facing each other. David left his things with the keeper of supplies, ran to the battle lines, and greeted his brother. As he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine, champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. When the Israelites saw the man, they all ran from him in great fear. And in verse 32, same chapter, David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go out and fight him." And 45 through 51, David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will hand you over to me, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. Today I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand, and he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took hold of the Philistine's sword and drew it from the scabbard. Then he killed him. He cut his head off with a sword. So we see here, and then the Philistines ran when they saw what had happened, and Israel was given a great victory that day by the Lord. So we see David has had some great successes, and it looks like smooth sailing right into the kingdom for David. But wait, trouble sets in 1 Samuel 18:12 through 16. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David, but had left Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaigns. Well, wait a minute, 6 through 11. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs and with tambourines and lutes. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. "They have credited David with tens of thousands," he thought, "but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom?" And from that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. The next day, an evil spirit from God came forcefully upon Saul. He was prophesying in his house while David was playing the harp, as he usually did. Saul had a spear in his hand, and he hurled it, saying to himself, "I'll pin David to the wall." But David eluded him twice. So, David's run into some trouble here. And Saul is after him. And he chased him all over Israel and then some, as is described in 1 Samuel 23:7 through 29. Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah, and he said, "God has handed him over to me, for David has imprisoned himself by entering a town with gates and bars." And Saul called up all his forces for battle to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was plotting against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, "Bring the ephod." David said, "O Lord of Israel, your servant has heard definitely that Saul plans to come to Keilah and destroy the town on account of me. Will the citizens of Keilah surrender me to him? Will Saul come down, as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. And the Lord said, He will. Again David asked, Will the citizens of Keilah surrender me and my men to Saul? And the Lord said, They will. So David and his men, about 600 in number, left Keilah and kept moving from place to place. When Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he did not go there. David stayed in the desert stronghold and in the hills of the desert of Ziph. Day after day Saul searched for him, but God did not give David into his hands. While David was at Horesh in the desert of Ziph, he learned that Saul had come out to take his life. And Saul's son Jonathan went to David at Horesh and helped him find strength in God. Don't be afraid, he said. My father Saul will not lay a hand on you. You will be king over Israel, and I will be second to you. Even my father Saul knows this. The two of them made a covenant before the Lord. Then Jonathan went home, but David remained at Horesh. The Ziphites went up to Saul at Gibeah and said, Is not David hiding among us in the strongholds at Horesh on the hills of Hakilah, south of Jeshimon? Now, O king, come down whenever it pleases you to do so, and we will be responsible for handing him over to the king. Saul replied, The Lord bless you for your concern for me. Go and make further preparation. Find out where David usually goes and who has seen him there. They tell me he is very crafty. Find out about all the hiding places he uses and come back to me with definite information. Then I will go with you. If he is in the area, I will track him down among all the clans of Judah. So they set out and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. Now David and his men were in the desert of Maon in the Arabah, south of Jeshimon. Saul and his men began the search, and when David was told about it, he went down to the rock and stayed in the desert of Maon. When Saul heard this, he went into the desert of Maon in pursuit of David. Saul was going along one side of the mountain, and David and his men were on the other side, hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his forces were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul, saying, Come quickly, the Philistines are raiding the land. Then Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. That is why they call this place Selah Hamalekoth. And David went up from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. So we see here that David had been called by God. He'd been placed in the palace. But Saul became jealous and pursued him and chased him, and he chased him, and he chased him. But God delivered David each and every time. I had experienced a difficult time in my employment this week, and this kind of gave me the idea for this message. Sometimes God puts us in positions and calls us to places that are in His will, but we run into difficulty, and we struggle, and we get stressed out, and we lose faith, and we wring our hands. But if we stay calm like David did and seek God's will, He has the potential to guide us to where we need to go. Proverbs 3:5 says, Trust in the Lord with all your heart and acknowledge Him in all your ways, and He will guide your path. Today, we seek God through Jesus. David used the Thurmon and the Ummon, as was the practice of the priests in the Old Testament times. If God has for sure given you the message and the sign and the word that where you're supposed to be is the place you're supposed to be, and you don't doubt that, and He will do that if we ask Him, just hang in there, because He's going to get you where you need to go. He gave me the right ideas to propose to overcome the difficult situation, and he provided a person to step in and be motivated to complete the task that I was needing completed from a department. So I was delivered this week, and you, as David it was, you will be also. And David's kind of triumph, one of his triumphs, is found in 2 Samuel 2, the chapter 2, and also chapter 5. I'm not going to read it. You can research it on your time if you would like. It is when he was given the kingdom of Judah and then later Israel, and reigned many years very successfully, but not without trouble. There were times when he had more trouble, and there are times when you and I will have more trouble as well. But the secret is to trust God. We've been told in Hebrews that I will never leave you and forsake you by Him. So hang in there and endure. Help will be with you, and you have been called to do something great. So stay faithful and do it.